Mage 40K, Episode 9. I Want My Robo-Mummy. After some extended zaniness running around the webway and having polite conversation with warp gods, our band of lunatic mages had made our way back to our former base, the O Imperator Quare. We had been flung there by a petulant Tzeentch after an impromptu dip in the Well of Eternity. So we all had some powerful magical mojo now, but we were also radiating magical resonance. Bard spoke as a chorus, that guy radiated otherworldly happiness, Competence was becoming a Necron, Welshie was just a Romulan, Weeb had a unicorn horn, and Critical had chalk-white skin and bone shards growing out of his flesh. Needless to say, we looked kind of weird. This was probably why the retinue of Inquisitor Greg Sargent, also known as the All-Guardsman Party, were blaring alarms throughout the ship and broadcasting warnings of demon incursion. That, and we had entered the ship through the warp, even getting stopped at the Geller field before it blinked, so we thought they had some legitimate concerns. It was still hurtful, though. We tried to broadcast our identity and benevolent intentions via the ship's Vox, but were shouted down by a paranoid Twitch. Mind magic was suggested, but several of us argued that this would only lead to more shooting, especially right after a Geller field breach. The problem was these guards had about 20 levels of figure it out with explosives between them, and if anyone could take out someone on our power level, it was probably them. Eventually, we decided that it would probably be easiest to just find, or make, since we now had 5 dots in each of our primary magical spheres, our own ship, sans paranoid xenophobes who were uptight about magical taint. This was easier said than done, however, as we also needed to gather a number of supplies that were larger than we could easily carry. Also, we had some friends and allies here. Those included our Grot Tech Whiny, that guy's Tau girlfriend, Bard's sister librarian situationship, and a few other crew members we had grown fond of. Upshot, we had been deposited in the airlock/hangar for the inquisitorial vessels at the top of the ship, and most of the crew quarters, for the special people anyway, were near the ventral section and our own quarters. The guardsmen, as inquisitorial agents, could have gotten the nice rooms, but apparently had installed a permanent barracks right next door to the Gellerfield generators. So we had plenty of free time to leisurely secure our more immediately valuable belongings, and to start making some plans for the Trojan Squig and our Mad Science Workshop. Trademark. We went through our quarters to grab anything we thought useful. A bunch of us grabbed our clothes, and this led to a comment from Weeb about, "You all still wear clothes?" "Yes." "You don't?" "Shapeshifter, I just grow them. I haven't bought actual clothes in, months." "So, you're naked right now, and sitting your bare ass on our chairs." Weeb made uncomfortable eye contact with all of us before delivering a firm, "Yes." We decided to leave the cushions where they were. Once we had gathered the rest of our easily portable shinies, we went to check on the crew most likely to be loyal to us before conversing with the paranoid, psyker-hating, heavily armed lunatics. We found our friends sitting in a common room in the nicer crew quarters, behind some sealed blast doors. Protocol for non-essential, non-combat personnel was just to hunker down in the nearest safe space when a warp incursion happened. We were sure it was them when we heard someone shout, "Jin!" before a tiny, squeaky voice shouted, "Go fish!" which devolved into an argument about which game they were playing and what the rules actually were. We knocked on the door, and the voices went suddenly quiet. "Who is it?" "Your bosses." "Prove it, you potential demons. Open the door or we'll melt it off the hinges. And you with it." "Yeah, that sounds like them." It turns out our crew wasn't too concerned about the warpy resonance we were broadcasting. When we didn't immediately start eating faces or trying to corrupt everything, they decided to take our word that we were sane. Or at least no crazier than when we had left. The Xenos didn't really care about the warpiness either, considering it to be weird Humy shit, while the sister librarian had served a number of Inquisitors and seen what fighting the warp did to you. And, comparatively, we weren't really that bad. Whiny did offer to make us some copper rods to earth the magic, but a quick experiment revealed that only worked on Wa energy, unfortunately. Also, that guy was a different version of himself, and, as a canine, didn't fully understand the concept of girlfriend. Mate, sure. Friend, yes. But girlfriend threw him. After a great deal of conversation, He was able to get his head around the idea that she was only supposed to pet him, but he couldn't fathom why he would reciprocate and only get pets from her. It was decided by all parties that they should break up, but she was consoled by being brought on board as our head engineer for our new planned vessel. This perked her up some. The trio, along with the various crew members that volunteered to come along, began packing up our workshop and making ready to transfer vessels, possibly at great speed. From there, we found our way down to the Geller field, in search of the all-guard party. We found their room, complete with numerous warning signs. Critical inched forward, knocked firmly, then we all dove for cover as a claymore mine obliterated the door, frame, and large sections of the surrounding wall. Once the smoke cleared, we peeked through the various holes and saw that none of the guardsmen were home. We left a note apologizing and offering to fix the damage. Then we started to do a magical search, but were reminded that we were still in the warp and that this was a terrible idea. So Welshie pulled his Romulan scanner, under the assumption that if techno-sorcery wasn't exactly safe, it was at least a lot less hazardous. We found the signatures of our former companions split into two groups, one near the bridge alongside the central access corridor, and one near the rear by the engine room. We headed to the bridge first. We were walking along the main corridor when we got evidence of the guards, by which I mean we came inside of a large, impromptu barricade at the far end of the passage, right before you got to the bridge and its associated regions. Then, Bard got shot by a lasbolt. His armor took the brunt of it, but he was pretty badly singed. Our life mages took care of him, only for a lasbolt to strike him again, along with a female, although not exactly feminine, shout of, "When I shoot you, you stay shot. Your warning shot was shooting someone in the face? He didn't die, so yes." We had found Almi, it seemed. We immediately moved into cover, or created some out of thin air, and began to commit diplomacy. We hadn't gotten much beyond general shouting to calm down when a bundle came tumbling down the passage. It was about 6 foot long, shiny, and writhing. We tried to summon cover to approach cautiously, but it seemed more difficult the closer we got. Then we saw that it was duct tape. A duct-taped untouchable. "Well, that seems kind of rude," said Competence. "Do you need some help out of there?" "Yes, please. Those guys are jerks." We were about to start unwrapping when someone mentioned the painful effect of duct tape on body hair. So, given our magic was different enough that a psychic null/blank didn't completely block it, just made it harder, several of us were able to help Competence turn the adhesive to water. The untouchable squirmed free and declared himself our friend for life. This wasn't his first time being duct taped, and getting free really hurt. After this, we exchanged some words with the guards. We told Sarge, Almi, and Doc to quit shooting. They told us to quit being warp-tainted. How? That stumped them. While they were distracted, we summoned a barricade, complete with small wheels, and began pushing it up the hallway under perfect cover. A few grenades came our way, but our matter, forces, and correspondence mages got rid of them before there was any real harm. We also thumped into a couple more duct-taped untouchables, who we freed. Turns out, when the all-guard party heard the Psychers were going into the warp to play with dark gods, they had stocked up, which we found sensible. We offered the untouchables a job where they were treated like actual people, and they jumped at it. This was followed by a shout from the guards that they couldn't agree, and that they were still part of the Inquisitor's crew, damn it. We countered that we were also Inquisitorial agents, so it was just a transfer, not a desertion. This did not win the argument, and it seemed more and more likely that we were going to have to resort to percussive diplomacy. That's what we were resolved to do when we finally breached their impromptu barricade, with our much superior magical one. The guards had abandoned the position, and were now peeking out of the doorways and corridors in the smaller passages leading to the main bridge. Their guns were also peeking out, so we stayed behind our moving shield and just shouted, "I assure you, while this may all seem like magic to you, what we are doing is actually technology. You just can't understand it, you stupid, stupid man." This worked surprisingly well, probably because the insults sounded more like pretentious psyker assholes being themselves, and less like something trying to be cunning or sinister. We heard Sarge talking via Vox to their techie, Tink, who confirmed that Imperial tech did indeed suck, so there was some plausibility to our argument. Competence pointed out that we did tell them we were donning disguises when we left, Sarge countered that we had said Eldar, but if we were currently disguised as horrifyingly tainted demon hosts, it was pretty convincing. Weeb asked if Sarge was seriously trying to tell us he'd never had to adapt a plan on the fly. This led to some muttered agreement, which Competence capitalized on by pointing that we just wanted to get the hell out of their hair. You do? Yes, we just want to gather our stuff and the crew that aren't terrified of us and leave. Pass on a message to the Emperor that our mission against the Dark Gods was a success. And maybe drop us off in an asteroid belt. Preferably one with an abandoned mining colony if possible. We could use the material. When this led to confusion, Weeb continued that we were still loyal and still working for the Emperor, but we were up to some warpy psyker bullshit. We knew his crew's history with that, so we didn't plan to ask them to be involved. Just let us get our stuff and hitch a bit of a ride. This led to some shouted conversation between all of the guard members present, and eventually it was agreed that if we retreated to our section of the ship and stayed there until we reached our destination, we could probably get along. But Twitch, Tink, Nubby, and Fumbles, and Jim and Hannah were currently in control of the engine room, so we would probably have to deal with, read, talk to, or tranquilize them first. We backed away slowly, and after Sarge sent out some messages, we had free passage to the other end of the vessel, where we found the crazier part of the All Guards party. We made our way to the aft of the ship, our ceasefire with the crew holding fairly well. As we got closer, we noticed more and more mines and various booby traps, especially once we got to the giant cargo bay section at the rear of the ship. It was a series of large, industrial hallways leading to cavernous storage chambers. Just the place for a psychotic paranoid to really cause some trouble. We were trying to be cautious about this, though. We could control people's minds, or bend reality to our will, but doing that seemed counterproductive with this bunch. We figured good old-fashioned, non-lethal violence would do best. Punching was a language the guards understood. Then, once everyone was calm, i.e. mildly concussed, we could have a reasonable chat. As we entered one of the bays, we knew we were in the right place, because all the lights flickered off, a spooky voice came over the box speakers saying, "Leave now." No. Oh, come on. It didn't take much to tell it was Nubby Nubs doing his best I am scary voice. But he had a high-pitched, Weasley, almost Cockney accent, so it wasn't exactly intimidating. More like, "Leave now." Competence, knowing they could hear us, started shouting orders to calm down, quit being stupid, and just drop us off at the nearest asteroid field. This resulted in an offer to send us there express, along with a giant ball of plasma. Competence was able to dodge, as it was fairly slow-moving. I mean, by bullet standards, and she was a combat veteran wizard. And well, she pulled out his instruments to detect the guards. It was much easier, given that they were all human, even Nubby. He did get one return that blinked in and out a bit, but we decided it was the stealthing psyker Fumbles, and not a huge threat. He started shouting out everyone's positions to the air, and noted that if they didn't want to die, they should probably move. His instruments showed that they did, but that was probably the wrong thing to say, as the walls around us exploded. He was firmly reminded by Competence and Weeb that we were not going to kill anybody. We were choosing violence, yes, but that was limited to a mild thrashing. Still, magic is broken, and most of us were able to dodge most of the blasts, and there was a lot of shouting from Twitch about hacks and cheating psychers. Apparently, he expected the booby traps to be a bit more lethal, or at least incapacitating. There were some laughs and catcalls about him slipping from the rest of the guards. While they were distracted, Critical reached out with his entropy magic and short-circuited Tink's plasma gun. He didn't make it explode, just start blinking warnings and threatening to vent, as he knew that most Imperial Guard plasma gunners were used to throwing their somewhat temperamental weapons before they went boom, so it wasn't too life-threatening an attack. Critical made sure there was plenty of time for Tink to react, and while there was much cursing about people breaking his things, the annoying trooper was just fine. Well, he kind of screwed up the throw, so when he tossed the venting gun, it bounced off a nearby pipe, clocked him in the head, and then rolled a ways down the corridor while he stumbled quickly in the other direction. His drone was recording everything, so everyone got a good laugh later. But he was fine and busy saying some very unkind things about psychers and their bullshit. If somebody hadn't decided to be a pain in the ass, he'd still have his plasma gun, Competence supplied. It's his job to be a pain in the ass. That's why we keep him round, returned Nubby. Yeah, but not to us. Well, technically, his job's to be a pain in the ass to everyone who's not us, and the usness of you lot is under consideration, and less talky, more shooty. This led into a long, loud discussion about who was us, what constituted us, and, from Tink, whether or not Nubby got to say what his job was. These guys were dangerously competent, but they weren't exactly intimidating. While they were distracted by being petulant nerds, that guy decided to take matters into his own hands. He raced after the known location of Twitch, but in a happy, smiling dog, play with me sort of way, not aggressively. He turned a corner, skidded to a halt in front of the horrified, det-pack-wielding trooper, and gave him the puppy dog eyes. What the warp are you? I'm a dog. I just want to play. You're an abomination, so no. And Twitch ran off. But he didn't blow that guy up, so probably a win. Competence started shouting to everyone that these were disguises as part of a pending mission, and we weren't actually tainted. The sane members of the guards party, Jim, Hannah, Tink, and Fumbles, agreed that this made sense, but then got a little concerned about what sort of mission would require looking warp-tainted. Competence said, That's classified, but I'm fairly confident it's exactly what you're thinking of. This worked. They all basically agreed, well, that's clearly bullshit, but if I press, I'll have to know, and the Inquisition has feelings about people who know things. Nubby, on the other hand, asked about the randomness of metal skin, a unicorn horn, and a dogman. From an uncertain passage came a cry of, Yeah, explain the damn dogman, along with a mine. It wasn't aimed at anyone, just sort of a punctuation mark. Critical tried, You ever heard of the Wizard of Oz? But was met with resounding no's. Turns out his references were 38,000 years out of date. But it would have been a great explanation if it worked. Pretty much everyone was willing to talk at this point, except for the explosives expert, who was still haunting the pipes. Unbeknownst to him, Critical reached out with entropy and disabled the wiring in some of his detonators. Not all, though, just a random selection. Because literal chaos. Finally, Welshie tried some of his Romulan logic. Look, Mr. Twitch, either we are telling the truth, in which case you're obstructing official inquisitorial business, or we're lying, in which case we're powerful psychic psychopaths, and you are trying to keep us on your ship. All we want is to get our stuff and leave. So, what exactly are your motives here? This led to a pronounced silence from the demo trooper. It also helped convince everyone except Twitch, who declared that everyone else had turned traitor and been corrupted by chaos. He started chucking det packs, but mostly at the ghosts and orcs and ghost orcs that he swore were after him. None of us were anywhere close, so it wasn't actually a concern. Then, when about half of them didn't go off, he got even more freaked out and took off for the bowels of the ship. Thinking quickly, a few of our mages used entropy, matter, and life to cause a discarded banana peel to appear directly in front of Twitch's foot, causing him to slip, bang his head, and knock himself out. This might not have worked fully, but our mages heard a Looney Tunes theme in their heads as they did the magic. Rule of funny is very powerful when you hang around with tricksters. Twitch was retrieved, and all parties agreed that everyone should calm down and just get us off the ship. We were allowed to go back to our section, while all the hallways to and from it were mined. The guards were nice enough to inform us about the mines, but not where they actually were. But our allies could move back and forth as needed. It was only a few days to a nearby asteroid field, and it even had a long-forgotten Mechanicus outpost. Well, it may not have been forgotten, but no one was around to object, and we really didn't care, since we were going to be coming after the Mechanicus before long anyway. Before we dealt with them, however, our next target was the Necrons. We figured if we could deal with those guys, we could employ their technology to deal with the Admech, and possibly the Tyranids. Fortunately, Competence had been given a business card by Trazen the Infinite some time ago. Since he was an avid collector, though, we figured we should probably deal with him before we made a completely unique spacecraft that might tingle his acquisition senses. So, once we had made our way down to the Mechanicus facility, which luckily had power and oxygen and such, we called him up. We thought of offering him his soul back, making him the only Necron in the universe with a soul. Bard suggested that, since that would involve fighting a Catan, and possibly reversing its digestion process, we might as well grab all of them. This sounded difficult, but we pointed out that growing the Necron's new bodies, without all the cancer, would be comparatively easy. At his level of power, he didn't even really need materials. He could just kind of make it happen with enough time. Then Competence realized that, at her level of spirit, she could do the same with souls. So we could give all the Necrons new, better bodies, clean souls, and any number of other things. This sounded like a pretty good opening offer. We pressed the call button on the business card, and a small hologram appeared. "Hello, I am a subroutine of Treason the Infinite. How may I help you?" Competence identified herself. "Ah, yes, the young lady with the internal ironworks project. I was thinking of doing a gallery on the respiratory and circulatory systems of various species. A mix of art and science, if you will." "Oh, yes, very educational. Probably good for school field trips and such. But I had a different topic for the moment. How would you like your soul back? Or a brand new one?" I'm not sure how I would display that. I don't really have a gallery for souls." "Yet." For the record, Trazen's face is an unmoving, metal death mask, but we could see him get a thoughtful look at that comment. The hologram asked us to hold for a moment, and it blinked out. A few seconds later, a hole opened in space, and the real Trazen stepped through to deal with us in person, and we discussed our plans to return the Necron tier. He noted that restoring him and or his people would be nice, since it was good to feel things like the sun, eat food, make love. Well, he wasn't sure about that one, having been a scholar all his life, but he was reliably informed that it was fairly nice. But there were also the disease and pain. We gave him a short list of all the wacky things our resident life mage could do, including making new, non-shitty bodies with no ability to get cancer, ever. Trazen was definitely intrigued, although he also noted that only the higher-ranking Necrons still had minds, or anything that could be restored. The regular soldiers, peasants, and workers had been basically erased, except maybe for some tactical knowledge or basic programming. So, really, we would only be restoring the elites, and they might keep the regular warriors in their current form. We weren't sure about this, as it sounded like more or less handing the Necron/Necron tier the reins to the galaxy, but we agreed to hash out the specifics later. Although Bard started muttering something about eat the rich, but when it was pointed out that they were metal and hard to digest, it changed to recycle the rich into cheap beer cans. Regardless, Trazen thought it sounded like a neat idea. The only problem was that he didn't have the requisite materials. Those were available only to the Silent King, along with a control device for all the Necron. It had supposedly been broken, but if we could find its pieces or recreate the device, we could control the Necron, use them to save the galaxy, and then order them into some sort of re-transference chamber. He wasn't sure about the specifics, but there was a servant of the Silent King called Oricon. He would certainly know, or know where to find, the information. Fortunately, Trazen knew right where to find Oricon himself, and could give us the coordinates to his planet. Very helpful. Possibly suspiciously so. So we had our target, and we had our goal. Now we just needed a way to get there. With that in mind, we waved Trazen goodbye and moved to one of the compound's viewports to set about creating our own ship. Before he left, we were able to get a bit of Necron tech and some sparse information on biotransference. Also, we noticed that he was eyeing all of us, especially the metallic-skinned Competence, in what would have been a creepy way, if he had a face which could move. And Critical had noticed a small white cocktail napkin with the scribbled words, "Warp Freak Gallery." So we were glad to see the back of him. Those unsettling thoughts in mind, we set about to create our own ship, with blackjack and hookers, which is a very ornate-sounding process for what was essentially bickering and bad ideas. For instance, we were going to press gang crew, but we were planning to use Romulan tech, and Imperials are pretty stupid. We thought we might implant some skills in the humans with mind magic. Hold still, we're improving you. but that felt kinda icky, even for us. But we had a box full of Dark Eldar souls, complete with a new conscience, and the knowledge to create Necrodermis with matter, so we could get ourselves a crew. And as literally superhuman intellects, they should be able to figure out the Romulan tech with little trouble, especially if we added translations. Also, we had a standing deal with Ahriman to restore his Rubik Marines, so we might have more troops. This also meant that we didn't entirely want to be stealthy when traveling the warp. In fact, we put a giant warp beacon on the sucker to attract Ahriman. And because, where the orcs saw demonic incursion as in-flight entertainment, we saw it as recruitment. Or hunting. If this sounds a bit extreme, it was suggested that we could just get an HR department, but we all decided that was too nefarious. Still, Bard insisted that we have some sort of Gellerfield, if only so we could nap in peace. So maybe just have one hold be a demon welcome zone. This quickly warped into a full-on demon bar and casino, with Slaaneshi dancers, Tzeentchian dealers, Khornate bouncers, and Nurglite cooks. And Malal's demons, whatever they were, could be pit bosses. Although Bard did admit that if we put that at the back of the ship, we could name it the SS Mullet, business in front, party in the rear. We came up with names such as the Abomination, the Legitimate Business Vessel, or the Enterprise, just for fun. Actually, we figured we would forcibly convert any demons that came aboard, just to make it clear who we were. We had God Bleach, trademark, which we put in a bucket over several doors for the Nurgle demons. Bard planned to teach the Khornates tea ceremonies and flower arranging, and so on and so forth. This plan was going along swimmingly, until we realized the rest of us had been quiet for too long, and got suspicious. There was, as expected, much screaming, although he did like the idea of stealing random demons. Eventually we made a pocket dimension attached to one very heavily barred door, with no way to actually infect the rest of the ship. Bard also summoned the spirit of Kilroy to leave a stamp wherever we went, so our demon allies could find us, and our enemies would have fair warning. Everywhere we stopped, there was an immaterial sign saying, "Kilroy was here," and pointing in our direction. We also talked about including a shipboard version of our black hole gun, along with some form of Romulan radiation that warped physical space. Critical Incompetence also devised an EMP laser, which, considering nuclear devices were part of the forbidden dark age of technology, was going to catch a bunch of people by surprise. We also had Necrodermis armor, kinetic and energy shielding, and cloaking technology. We had working Star Trek-style teleporter technology and replicators, and a battering ram, because you can't have a ship in 40K without a battering ram. For the record, the all-guards party kept their ship nearby while we were busy making our own, if only so we would have beds and oxygen and stuff. Although, partway through molding our ship out of raw material and a bunch of different technologies spliced together, one of the shipboard tech priests looked out the window, then issued a ship-wide order that no one was allowed to look outside on pain of pain. And then death. And then robot hell. Once our ship was fully created and all our people and stuff moved over, we bid goodbye to the guards, and they bid good riddance to us, and we set on our way to find the Silent King's throne world. We moved at warp speed on this trip, rather than moving through the Immaterium, so there were no demonic incursions. We had codes to identify us as a Necron vessel of the proper dynasty, so we had little trouble getting past the interplanetary defenses. We found a tomb complex, i.e. a big black pyramid, on the main continent, and, just to be safe, uploaded our consciousnesses into backup bodies. We had made those, on general principles, and sent them down to explore. We still resonated with warpy power, but we decided the Necron probably wouldn't notice. We teleported down and entered the tomb. We kept contact with our ship's AI, Scotty. It was dusty and silent as the, tomb. The walls were onyx black, but there was a sickly green light coming from various symbols and sigils on the wall. Also, there were some collections of Necron script, which Competence was able to translate with some effort. A lot of it was just decoration, but one right above the door said something that translated roughly as, "Please wipe sandals before entering." We wiped our feet on a small metal doormat that translated as, "Go away." We try to be polite. Anyway, Critical took point and we started to move as stealthily as possible. Except for that guy, who was still a dogman. He smelled something and started loudly announcing his presence, and occasionally barking at empty air. When nothing came to try to eject us, we kept moving forward. We didn't notice any traps, and figured out after a while that it was probably because we were on the entrance level, and were currently in a bunch of winding passageways meant to impress and disorient visitors. Also, there was the Necron, or really Necrontier, equivalent of offices and cubicles on this level. We even spotted a glyph that looked like a scarab dangling from the arm of an Ankh, with a motto that Competence translated as, "Hang in there, baby." So, a bunch of unimportant functionaries behind some over-elaborate hallways and chambers meant to show off. It didn't seem like much of a threat until we heard the metallic skittering. Most of us immediately thought of scarabs, which it was. A small swarm of robotic bugs turned the corner and started scrabbling for our squishy flesh. We had backups, but we could still feel pain, so we took up a fighting stance. Well, Competence and Welshie hadn't played any 40K or Dawn of War games, so they needed a quick explanation. This led to a conversation, as we were shooting and smashing away, about how, since these things built stuff for the Necron, maybe they would have information on Necron tech that we could steal from them. This, in turn, led to a cessation of the stomping and a slow walking retreat as Competence hacked her way into the Necron version of the noosphere. There was some concern until it was pointed out that we were in what was, at least in part, an office building. While any sticky notes on computer screens were probably long since dust, we could always try the Necron equivalent of "Kill all life 12345." Sure enough, a version of that worked on the third attempt. From there, she was able to connect to the Scarab controls. With the power of Scotty the AI, whom we had built from techno-magical quantum computing parts, she was able to pull off a massive brute force attack and access the Scarab controls, shutting them down. Or at least, she would have done if we hadn't smashed them all by that point. That guy had been especially thorough, declaring, "Death to the evil vacuum fleas!" Bard, meanwhile, had developed a new spell called Coyote Gospel, which allowed him to use spirit magic to ignore all damage up to a certain point, so long as he did it cartoon style. So when the scarabs started trying to eat him, or whatever they were really doing, he pulled a bottle of hot sauce from nowhere and doused himself, causing several of the robots to turn red and shoot steam from their ears. So yeah, we stomped them all, but we had a new weapon for future encounters. We gathered up the larger pieces of scrap with the intent of making our own scarabs, possibly with laser beams attached to their heads. We didn't do too much wandering around before we heard more tiny metallic legs. This time, though, Competence led with the override code, and the insectoid threats dropped to the ground. We swept them into a pre-made pocket dimension for later tinkering with. Then we got bored, and Critical started using his power fist to punch through the corridors. The black stone proved pretty durable, until Competence pulled her transmogrifier gun and undid the molecular bonds, turning it to sand. Bard grabbed a handful for pocket Necron sand, just in case. We found ourselves emerging from the former wall into a large, elaborate chamber, leading to an ornate stairwell. Sort of a foyer situation. We congratulated ourselves on the shortcut and headed up. We came out into a more ornate passage, but before we got too far along, we spotted a small scarab swarm doing something on one of the fancy sarcophagi. We took a few potshots before Competence reminded us about the password. She tried to use it, but it somehow came out as a rickroll. Magic is weird, y'all, as are the dice. They weren't harmed, but they definitely became hostile, so the rest of us just shot them a bunch. We made a lot of noise in the fight, which drew the attention of further guardians of the tomb. On this level, the scarabs were backed up by more potent figures, although not necessarily that high level. As we were running to and fro around the bugs, Critical spotted a pair of metallic humanoids moving towards our chamber. He shouted a warning, and Competence and Bard tried something they had been theorizing for some time. As potent spirit mages, the two could actually create an entirely new soul out of the mystic ether. Bard had mind, and Competence had matter, so they also had the means to access the remnants of memories, biological components, and electronic pathways to get a semblance of who/what their souls were, as discussed. Then Competence set her transmogrifier to re-soul, which was drawn in with Sharpie, and fired. The two Necron warriors stood confused. One asked, "What happened?" before they realized that they had enough awareness to ask questions, and that they had a them to realize it. This led to a lot of metallic shrieking and freaking out, while the 2 million-year-old robots had spontaneous existential crises. Bard gave them a pat on the back each and a pre-developed case of Robo-beer. They were very much not a problem anymore, and after shutting down the scarabs for us, they wandered off. We shouted that, whenever they were ready, we were working on giving them back their bodies, sans cancer. As thanks, they mentioned that the way to the next level was towards the north part of this floor, but the direct routes were currently blocked. We wished them luck and went our separate ways. Even though we knew the rough direction, we still took a while getting there. The scarabs weren't too much of an issue, since we could shut them down remotely, but we did come across a few more warriors. We caught one by surprise, as did the return of his soul. While he was standing there confused, that guy decided to help and give him back all of his memories. Fortunately, most of them were walking the same corridor for millions of years. If they had been millions of years of distinct memories, he probably would have gone catatonic, even with a Necron brain. So he remembered walking the corridor a lot, shooting the occasional rat-like creature. But that guy didn't stop there. He gave him back all his memories, including his family, the biotransference, and everything he'd ever lost. There was a shrill metallic keening, which resolved into digital sobs of, uh-huh, uh-huh, uh-huh. It was horrible, and that guy got a stern talking to about asking first, and maybe not providing millions of years of depression all in one go. We said we were trying to restore the Necron tier without their diseases. "You mean you're going to do what you did to me?" "Yes, exactly." "You monsters." We reassured him that his case was just over-enthusiasm, and we would be more careful with everyone else. We promised to use brain lube, which was a lie and went against everything we stood for, but he didn't know that. He gave us some directions as well as a warning about some form of subtle trap or defense, and we promised to try to find his wife and child, who had also undergone the process. Not that we had any way of telling one random Necron from another, aside from rank insignia and such, but we figured that if they all got roboticized in the same batch, there was a decent chance they ended up in the same general vicinity. So when we ran into 2 more patrolling Necron warriors, we asked if they were Bob's wife and son. We didn't actually know his name, but we figured we could just magic that issue away somehow. They responded by firing a Gauss flare at us. Fortunately, Bard was prepared and jumped in front of the party, whereupon a large section of his torso was vaporized. He looked down, shouted, "Missed me," and drank a glass of water, which proceeded to fill his body back up. The Necron were too much automata to be properly freaked out, or entertained, by this, but they were still distracted long enough for the rest of the party to spread out into the room and flank them. Blows were traded, body parts were removed and magically restored, and souls were shot into robotic bodies. By this point, Weeb had printed out some helpful "So you just got your soul back" pamphlets, which were much appreciated. One of them started to ask for his mommy, in what sounded like a child's voice if it was run through an AI voice generator. The other one started asking questions, but when the word millions popped up to describe the timescale, it began to freak out again. We told it not to worry about it, just take care of the kid, and sent them off to hang out with the guy who was crying about his family. There was no way to know it was the right family, but no way to know it wasn't, at least as far as we cared. We continued on our way and headed up the stairs. We came out into a hallway that looked somewhat familiar. I mean, even for a tomb made of identical stone hallways. As we looked around, trying to put our finger on what was bothering us, Competence noticed another sign about wiping your sandals, which we thought odd 3 levels up. Weeb used his life magic to transform his hand into a gecko-like thing with electronically enhanced sensing. Then, with some mind and forces, he started to scan the technology behind the walls. Not actually understand it, just basically taking magical mind pictures for later study. Some of us were distracted by this, but Competence started to have a suspicion and set her gun to disintegrate. She also set the nozzle to wide. Really, there was just a toggle that went from small to big, and fired a beam at an angle into the ceiling. When she ran into difficulty, she added a setting for 11 and turned the power up. Then up we went. We came out into a hallway that looked somewhat familiar. I mean, even for a tomb made of identical stone hallways. As we looked around, trying to put our finger on what was bothering us, Competence noticed another sign about wiping your sandals. Also, our scarabs were gone. God damn it. Then a voice came out of the speakers that must have been embedded into the walls, saying, "Nice try, mortal fuckers." We cursed loudly and vehemently, then tried going back down the stairs. This worked just fine, and we emerged onto the barren world outside the tomb door. We discussed trying to go up the side of the tomb and blast our way in from the top, but eventually decided to call that Plan B. We weren't technically here to loot the place, more break in and ask to borrow politely, so we opted to try diplomacy once more. Deciding that biology was more a suggestion than anything, Weeb turned into a Drider-esque spider creature. He began blotting the walls with webs, which he made curry-scented, so the smell would linger if something was teleporting the webs away. The rest of us complained loudly about Weeb's, quote, fragrant sharding, as we described it. We made our way to the wall we had bashed through, only to find it once more intact. We knocked our way through with little issue, only to emerge into the same room we'd seen before, but this time full of scarabs, as if they'd been waiting for us. Luckily, Weeb was moving along the ceiling, so he had a good position to cover some of them with webs. It had a moderate degree of success. Competence tried to use the shutdown code, but couldn't make her way onto the Wi-Fi in the first place. But she still had Scotty and a background in computer engineering. We just had to buy her time, which we were good at. Eventually she found the password, which was, "Stupid monkeys get off my planet." All one word. Rather than trying to hack the scarabs, which had also had their codes changed, she sent out an email attachment containing another rickroll, but received back a reply with, "Attention needed, R.E. Ligma." Also, as clarification, the Necron were stupidly advanced and had been engaging in etheric warfare longer than there had been humans. If this was a serious system, we would have been in trouble, but we were hacking the equivalent of the local Kinko's office, at least at these lower levels. Welshie, unsure of what was going on, summoned a mild EMP burst, if such a thing as mild EMPs even exist, that stunned a large chunk of the swarm for a few moments, but their Necron brains rebooted pretty quickly. But not quickly enough to avoid Critical's power fist. Nor were several of the ones trapped in webs. Critical liked to shout "Wah!" to invoke the power of Gork and Mork, but he didn't need to on these occasions. When asked why, he said it wasn't very sporting and just didn't feel right. Bard and Weeb then had to explain that Gork and Mork were totally okay beating up a defenseless opponent, so long as it was brutal, cunning, and or hilarious. Smacking a toddler? Not funny, not very orky. Not that they wouldn't, especially if it was an annoying toddler, but they wouldn't consider it a worthwhile scrap or anything. Punting a toddler into the next zip code, a real knee slapper and proper orky. So fair or sporting was not really part of the equation here. He appreciated the clarification and began wreaking green-tinged havoc on the defenseless droids. That guy joined in, chanting about death and killing Roombas. The phrase, "balls for the ball god, sticks for the stick throne," appeared, but we chose not to notice that. It was probably just high spirits. While this silliness was happening, Weeb turned to the still active scarabs and declared, "I am the pinnacle of multi-legged being. Join me in spidery superiority." Never mind the fact that they were designed like insects, not spiders. It worked. Mostly because Weeb had rearranged their patterns using prime magic, so that instead of being servants of the Necron, they were now servants of the Weeb. They climbed onto his spidery carapace, while we collected the scraps of the ones we had smashed, and we made our way to the ornate stairs to the next level. We came out into a hallway that looked somewhat familiar. I mean, even for a tomb made of identical stone hallways. As we looked around trying to put our finger on what was bothering us, Competence noticed another sign about wiping our sandals. Also, our scarabs were gone. Again. Also, there was a second poster this time, directly at eye level, right in front of us, with a giant skeletal robotic hand giving us the middle finger. This time, though, that guy said he had felt something. You see, in our adventures before coming to the 40K universe, that guy had been a time mage. He had rewritten his own past to be a mind mage this time, reality-shattering paradox be damned, but he still had enough know-how to at least recognize time magic when it was being used. This sort was based in 40K tech, rather than any warpery or magic he knew of, so it had taken him some time to figure it out. But someone was looping time on us. Weeb, for his part, went to the poster and synced his mind magic with it. Acting as an emotional bloodhound, he mystically traced the "fuck you" energy back to its source. He located it about half a dozen levels up, near the peak of the pyramid, radiating the pettiness of the world's worst bureaucrat. Like someone who had spent millennia working for a pompous boss who didn't listen to or appreciate them, and now he was in charge and was going to settle some scores. There was talk of sending him a magical computer virus, while Weeb advocated cursing him with eternal horniness and no physical body to relieve it, but Competence had a better idea. She forced her way into the system once more and, instead of launching an attack, just put us on the schedule for a meeting in 10 minutes. The speakers crackled and there was a cry of, "Oh, bullshit!" "Fine. I kind of respect that play. I'll let you up if only so I can get rid of you." As we moved through the tomb, we didn't meet any scarabs or warriors, although we heard some clanking receding into the distance. No more stealing Oricon's things, I guess. It took a while to make our way to Oricon's chambers, and we couldn't tell if we were going up or down or sideways for a lot of it, as physics was more a suggestion with this level of technology. We eventually entered a large chamber with a window facing the night sky, which was odd because there were no windows on the outside, and it was daytime in this part of the world. There were compasses, astrolabes, telescopes, and the quasi-magical sci-fi version of all of those same things. Amidst them was a Necron with a long, serpentine tail, and a lot of fancy baubles and gubbins dangling from his ornate jewelry. There were large golden fronds, for lack of a better word, surrounding his face, which contained one glowing green eye. He turned to face us and went, "Okay, what in the undead hells do you jackasses want?" His naked aggression took us off guard, mostly because it came in the form of berating rather than any actual attacks, which we would have understood a little better. The control rod? For the Necron? Why the fuck would I have that? It was destroyed. Who sent you here? We were given to understand that there were still pieces, and that they would most likely be kept on the former throne world of the Silent King, which is here. At least according to what Trazen said. Oh, that son of... Okay, do you know who would be likely to have an ancient artifact from millions of years ago? Oh, I don't know. Maybe the guy with the planet-sized museum. If such remnants exist, which they don't, Trazen would be the one to have them. Why did you want them anyway? Come to that, who are you? You just walk into my tomb, start breaking my walls and stealing my things, and you don't get immediately destroyed by my sentries. Better question, what are you? Oh, we were going to use them to gather all the Necron and give them back their bodies and souls. But, without the cancer, and with centuries to millennia lifespan. Not immortal, because we're not stupid, but very long. When this was met with silence, Critical continued, "We know you've been watching us moving through the tombs. You've seen what we can do. We're magic users, but of a kind that doesn't use the warp or chaos. So we can restore the Necrontyr souls and bodies. Didn't you see us do the soul part with some of your warriors already?" I don't actually have audio on this thing. I saw you point a strange weapon, then they started acting weird and walked away. Recreating their souls. This earned us a long stare from the glowing green eye, followed by a slow blink. Sorry? Say that again. Recreating their souls. Yeah, that's what I thought you said. Doesn't make any more sense the second time around. It's the first part of recreating their healthy bodies, and then giving them a new planet to live on without the murder sons. All of which we can do and have done. We gave the Craft World Eldar an entire new universe. True to form, no mental lube for our insanity. We figured directness helped sell our point, as did the fact that we could back up our nonsense with actual magic. He pondered this for a few minutes, then replied, Well, first off, that is very neighborly of you. Personally, I've always thought we should not return to our bodies, but ascend to be energy beings, become gods like the Catan. But, less colossal soul-eating dicks about everything. Still, I say the future is what we should turn to, not the past. But I can see where many of my peers would find this an attractive offer. The problem with energy being godhood, said Competence, is in this dimension you still have to deal with nonsense from the warp, and the Emperor, and the orcs, and all that. What you need is a different universe. Fortunately, there are plenty to choose from, and she proceeded to give him a grounding in multiverse theory. He finally agreed that the plan sounded interesting, albeit completely insane, but he still didn't have the control rod, and directed us back to Trazen. We did some magical nonsense to check his story, but really, the collector has the artifact in his collection made too much sense. Although we did wonder why Trazen would have sent us to steal something Orokin didn't have. We go way back, and we have hated each other for a long time. He probably sent you to annoy me, and maybe kill me if you could manage it. Or I would kill you. Win-win. Well, that was stupid of him. He should have known better. Yeah, stupid, arrogant, rude. These are all good words for Trazen. My personal favorite is asshole, although rat bastard is a close second. After some more conversation, and we touch-scanning all of Orokin's devices, which we could tell offended Orokin's inner nerd, we tried to make peace by offering to give him his soul back. After some consideration, he said yes. Turns out it was easier if they had memory and something of a will. After the magic was done, he didn't freak out, but did comment that it tingled. Then Incubus Weeb, who had taken control, used mind magic to make him horny. Just for pettiness reasons, really. Unfortunately, not only did he not have the physical body or technological engrams to even notice the feeling, but even in life he had been a crusty old scholar with no interest in anything but his books. So, in fact, we made him horny for books and charts, which, if you met an academic, isn't a very noticeable change. Orokin did declare that, in 60 million years, you are by far the strangest individuals I have ever met. Weeb teleported to his side, ran his gecko hands lovingly over Orokin's face, and whispered, You have no idea. Suffice to say, a weird time was had by all. Finally, mostly to be rid of us, Orokin gave us the coordinates and system codes to Trazen's tomb world/museum of Solemnness, on the promise that we would do something nasty to him. We said we would put him in a zoo if we couldn't think of anything more creative. Orokin laughed. He revealed that he was a chronomancer, and he did a little scanning to determine where we were liable to find the collector, since his museum was the size of a planet. He gave us a list of likely galleries, and politely but firmly showed us the door, although he did let us have a single scarab. We left, and Weeb uploaded all of the information he had scanned, including Orokin's head and some incredibly sturdy, technologically laden stone, not the warp-closing blackstone, from the intelligence dimension he had created. Hey, 5 dots in any sphere is ridiculous. And he uploaded it all into our computer. Plans were made to take the most interesting bits and, with more mind shenanigans, plant them in Whiny the Gretchen mechanic's head, and leave him alone with a pile of magically created necrodermis. Anyway, we got back in our ship and made our way to Solemnness. We put the business card Trazen had given us in our pocket dimension, or one of them, on the assumption that it had some sort of tracker. Along the way, we worked on our ensouling device. We also had several conversations about whether or not our ultimate plan was to become chaos gods, what our domains and demons would be. That guy wanted to be the god of responsibility, walking around and handing people mortgages or small children that they had to take care of.
and if that was technically a step down from our potential for magical bullshit. This led Weeb to get concerned, more so than normal anyway, and he started seriously making contingency plans to deal with the rest of us. He kind of expected us to be mad when we found out, but Bard said, "I thought we all had those. I made one the first week." And we all pulled out small notebooks. Fortunately, we were all reasonable people and had all independently put plans to deal with ourselves on page 1. Still, Weeb was moving from bored musing to active preparation, so it was clear he was bothered. He calmed down when we caught our first demons in the pocket dimension. A bloodletter and a demonette. The pair appeared in the fighting pit we had created and looked around to see their captors. We were hiding in the balcony, however, so all they saw were one another. They started snarling/laughing coquettishly and circling one another. Then we struck. Weeb and Critical reached out with Prime and Entropy magic and turned the first bloodletter into a fist. Not a glove or power fist or something, but a sentient hand, running around like Thing from the Addams Family, but much redder and ruder. It scuttled about in clear distress for a minute, before locating us as we emerged and flipping us off as hard as it possibly could. It was vibrating a little. It moved to try and hit us somehow, but then the spirit and mind mages hit it, shifting its metaphysical alliance to be part of Critical. He wanted it to be a demon of fist-fighting and righteous thumping. We dubbed it the Taint Puncher, and insisted that it only go after people who were kind of dicks, because we care from whence the poetic justice flows. Meanwhile, Weeb saw the thoughts crossing the demonette's face and said, "No," like he was scolding a naughty puppy. It then saw us forcibly convert the bloodletter and started trying to carve its way through the walls with its shoulder blades. We turned en masse, radiating warpy energy of a kind the demon didn't recognize, and giggled disjointedly. Incubus Weeb took point, making it into an avatar of his desire to help people. A therapy demon. But, as he described it, the kind who would randomly walk up to you at a crowded party, touch your arm, whisper, "It was never your fault," and disappear, leaving you a puddle of emotions in the middle of the dance floor. So, helpful, but in a demon-y sort of way. Spreading chaos and healing through trauma. Kind of a variant of our empathy bomb, really. He called them Weeb's Little Helpers, or just Little Helpers for short. No way this was ever going to come back to bite us. So with the first of our pending demon army successfully recruited, we moved on. Well, actually, we got really obsessed with building an entire monster manual of demons for ourselves, because we're huge nerds. We hadn't gotten beyond the planning phase, and maybe discussing converting that one paint engine we'd gotten from the Drukhari to convert the demons more efficiently, before we arrived on Solemnus. We entered the tomb complex turned museum, only to find that it felt oddly familiar. Either Trazen had visited human museums in the past, or he had provided the ideas in the first place. But either way, it felt just like home for our nerdy crew. There was even a food court, albeit on another continent and with no actual food. The gift shops were conveniently located every few miles, though. We resolved not to leave without some posters and plastic figurines. Competence was our guide, since she was the only one who could read Necron. The signage and maps were thorough, but the sheer size of the place left them still pretty confusing. Fortunately, we knew what we were looking for. We were trying to find Trazen to ask some pointed questions about a Necron control rod, or just hit him a lot, as the spirit moved us. The galleries Orican had suggested to us had been the following: the War in Heaven, the Siege of Terra, the Serenade Opera House, Armageddon, the Siege of Rax, or the Jokero Playpen? Weeb and Bard had groaned at these, but no one else really had much idea of what they were, beyond Terra being Earth, except that they all sounded pretty bad. Everyone was kind of nervous about visiting the galleries, because we knew Trazen filled his museum with living dioramas, until Critical pointed out that the creatures or people we found weren't hostiles, so much as new recruits, and we all felt better. We decided to go to the Opera House first, since that sounded the least immediately horrifying. And Weeb and Bard didn't know what it was, but they knew what most of the others were, and thought it was probably better. As an aside, as we walked, Competence noted that the signage was different in each section, as you would expect in a normal museum, but every sign had one label pointing to the Great Egress. This made Bard chuckle, but he didn't share why. We found a door in a hallway with the label Serenade Opera House and went in. A long, dark, winding tunnel finally opened out into a plush theater box, with velvety cushions and curtains. We could see out and down to the stage and the seating on the main floor, as well as into some of the other boxes along the balcony, though most provided enough darkness to hide in, just like ours. On stage stood a man with 3 arms, although the third one was clearly a prop. Bard found a handy program that explained that this was the opening night of a new performance, reimagining a famous folktale about some pauper prince and the 3-armed king. Weeb was more suspicious and started looking very closely. He realized that the prop arm was, in fact, a clever disguise. Like a guy with a huge beard sticking some wires in it that loop around his ears, so everyone immediately thinks, oh, that's a fake beard, as described by Terry Pratchett. This was a real third arm, disguised to look like a fake prop. Once he spotted that, he could see the makeup disguising the chitin. He turned to inform the party, but just as he got out the word, Gene Stealers, the display came to life. There was hypnotic singing for a few seconds, before a shot rang out, people started screaming, and Gene Stealers leapt from various side passages into the audience to rend and tear. We saw a number of people get ripped open and dropped to the floor, only to freeze in space, blood paused mid-fountain, as they weren't allowed to die. Presumably they would be repaired and reset for another performance. It was really creepy. And neither the Gene Stealers nor the other victims appeared to notice the time-locked corpses, even as they stepped around and over them.
Fortunately, the Stealers were very focused on their immediate victims and hadn't gotten to the boxes. Well, based on the screams, some had come through the box entries, but since ours led into the real world, we were still unnoticed. Also, Critical spotted a flash of metal in one of the boxes across the way, and we were able to spot what appeared to be Trazen lurking in the shadows. He waved cheekily. Not knowing much about opera, she decided to distract the Gene Stealers by projecting a holographic image, Star Trek style, so realistic looking, of a fat woman in Viking garb singing. It worked, and several of the Stealers lunged at the large woman with the ear-splitting voice. When their attacks went right through her, most began to ignore her, at least the ones who were more human. The more animalistic ones kept swiping for a few moments more before determining there was no point. Weeb suggested a more aggressive tactic and began to change his body and psychic signature to mimic a Gene Stealer patriarch and overwrite the ones that were present. Actually, he thought about it and decided to go full Hive Tyrant, just so there would be no chance of being outranked. Also, on his instruction, that guy scanned the mind waves to figure out which Stealer was the leader of this group. He wasn't reading the signals as such, just watching who seemed to be broadcasting the most mental noise, on the assumption that that would be the one issuing orders. Then he jammed the mental signals by broadcasting the telepathic message, "I know a song that gets on everybody's nerves." But he was doing this from the shadows in our box, so they all just started looking around in confusion and annoyance. Competence used this opening to broadcast an image of the truth of their impending digestion by a Tyrannid, which most Gene Stealers are not aware of. She was reworking souls and minds to see the truth. Several paused, looked down at their chitin and extra limbs, realized what the Tyrannid were and what they were going to do, and they started screaming. Several went to end themselves, only to freeze in place. Of the group hit, only the leader, possibly a Gene Stealer Magi or something, was keeping it together, shouting denials and self-encouragement, but we could tell from his voice that it was a close thing. Of course, we were still in the shadows and using non-visible magic, so we hadn't drawn any attention. Even Trazen didn't know it was us causing this, although he was pretty sure we had something to do with it. Also, he shouted out, "What is with the large, strangely dressed human woman? Is that meant to be a saint or something?" Bard, ever the pedantic nerd, started to correct his error when Welshie grabbed his shoulder, put a finger to his lips, and gestured at the Gene Stealers, who were still unaware of us. For his part, Trazen started to act offended until we gestured at the milling, killing Stealers, then he nodded his understanding. Meanwhile, Welshie kept up his attack/harassment. Back on the stage, the fat lady stopped singing,
unsheathed her sword, gave a very classy wah, and charged the Gene Stealer leader. He started to dodge her swipes until, after a few of his counterstrokes did nothing, he realized he was being attacked by what amounted to a picture of a sword. Not that that stopped the construct, and she just kept stabbing away pointlessly at an increasingly irritated, existentially terrified Gene Stealer. She even followed him when he tried to walk away, stabbing and stabbing until he just broke down crying in frustration and confusion, and froze in place. Based on this and what she could see of Weeb's transformation, including making his unicorn horn into a Tyranid one, Competence decided we had things well in hand and started mystically studying the gallery's stasis mechanism. By the time the whole thing was over, she was pretty sure she had mastered how to make one of Trazen's dioramas, and even the portable tesseracts. Meanwhile, Weeb had finished, and he stepped to the edge of the box as he broadcast a mental biological signal. As one, the Gene Stealers stopped, turned to face him, and began to bow. Weeb halted them, and then started doing a little dance with his hands making rabbit ears. They all joined in, some with multiple sets of hands making several rows of ears. After a second or two, they all froze, and Trazen cried out, "What the hell did you do to my Xenos?" Correction, my Xenos. Seriously, what are you? What did you do? We ignored him and started to discuss how many Tyranid Weeb could control with his magical horn, and if he would need to grow more to control a full swarm. Trazen didn't like being ignored. He started to shout at us about getting the hell off his planet, when Critical locked eyes and made random chance sit up and beg. He had intended to make a Rube Goldberg-style cascade, which ended up with the central stasis device falling into his outstretched hand. But he opened with, "Watch this," which gave all of us time to react and pump as much of our magical will as possible into the maneuver. So much so that reality just shrugged, there was a small pop, and the Tesseract device controlling the chamber dropped out of empty air into his palm. Upon which Trazen said, "Okay, fuck all of these." And the robotic body slumped forward, several of the more ornate gems and trinkets disappearing along with the consciousness of its occupant. We tried to track it with magic, but it moved too fast. But we had the metaphysical scent that he had left on the body, so we could track him. This also led to a discussion of creating a Trazen gallery, or capturing his soul and making him our librarian AI or something. After some frantic discussion, we decided that our shipboard pocket dimension was currently free of demons, so it would make a nice, safe holding space for our new Gene Stealer cult. New Chaos Gods or new hive minds, we were going to have some fun. From there, we decided to scope out the Siege of Terra to see what other goodies we could collect. Along the way, Bard kept snickering whenever Competence read the signs and mentioned the Great Egress. Finally, she pointed out she was pretty sure it was just another word for exit. Bard admitted yes, and it was an old P.T. Barnum ruse, proof that Trazen had met, or at least heard about, the famed con artist. Anyway, we found the Siege of Terra exhibit without too much trouble. There were several rooms full of artifacts and trinkets before we entered the main diorama. We came out of the intervening passageway to discover ourselves atop a golden palisade, standing next to 6 Imperial Fist Space Marines. At the bottom of the wall were twice as many Sons of Horus, trying to advance up scaling ladders. A few moments after we entered, they all sprang to life. As preparation, Weeb had warned us to guard ourselves against the massive amount of warpy nonsense that plagued the battle. When we arrived to find just a normal super soldier gunfight, he was extremely disappointed, and very vocal about it. That guy pointed out that there looked to be some warpy stuff happening in the distance, but that just turned out to be a sort of backdrop. Weeb vowed to fill out a comment card regarding the accuracy of the display. We didn't have time for that, though, as the Fist saw us, ignored the magical resonance each of us was producing, including a literal dog man, and said, "Good to see you, mortals. Grab your weapons and get to the line." We agreed, and Bard and Critical moved to the top of the closest ladder to make life difficult for the Chaos Marines. Weeb began playing air guitar, which seemed silly, but was actually a variant of his sexy healing dance. He was pumping inspiration and talent into all of us, and some of the Marines, while creating a zone of mystical difficulty for any traitors. The Sons of Horus, for their part, noticed us, but had bigger concerns. At least that's what they thought, until Critical came running up to the first to top the ladder, screaming wah and brandishing his power fist. Perhaps the Marine was thrown off by a human shouting an orc battle cry. Or perhaps he wasn't startled at all, just saw a puny human charging him and didn't care. Regardless, he stood there and took the blow. Which was a mistake, as an entropy-laden power fist blew his torso to mist. The chunks of armored legs, arms, and head fell down the ladder, knocking the next Marine off and causing no little consternation and cries of, "Oh, gross," at the bottom of the ladder. The Imperial Fist took this opportunity to rain down bolter shells on anything in seafoam green. While all this was going on, that guy looked around and spotted Trazen perched atop a crenellation on another section of wall, some distance away. The Necron Lord looked smug, until that guy decided to play rough. He pumped all the magic he could muster into a correspondence spell, opening a small hole behind Trazen that connected to the local system's sun. The robot had a moment to look startled, even on an unmoving face, before the star's gravity grabbed him and yanked him unceremoniously through the portal. It was just enough time for his signal to escape, however. Still, that guy's reasoning was that we already had one of Trazen's bodies in our possession. All we had to do was kill all the others, and he'd have no choice but to come to us. Standing behind everyone, Competence calmly surveyed the battle. She decided that what we really needed was overwhelming firepower. So, using matter magic, she called together the scraps of vehicles, weapons, and so on, scattered cosmetically around the base of the wall, along with some sections of the fortress defenses themselves. They smashed together, began revolving and glowing, and what emerged was a knight. If it had been designed by a meth-addicted Oscar the Grouch. We called it the Jank Knight, and it immediately began laying into the traitor Marines. Sons of Horus were cut down in hails of bullets or sawn in half with a person-sized chainsword. All the while, Bard and Weeb gave a shouted explanation of just what a knight actually was, and she made modifications on the fly. Once the Jank Knight entered the fray, it was all over by the screaming, pleas for mercy, and pained gurgling. Well, at first, when the knight, one of the fists, or one of us killed a traitor Marine, they would be frozen by the time storage mechanisms in the walls. But we already knew how those were made, and where they were stored, so a few spells ripped them right out, and we were able to fully murder the Chaos Marines. Because they deserved it. From there, we gave the Imperial Fists a brief, non-psychologically scarring version of events. Actually, that's a lie. Our motto is still no mind lube, so we told them everything. We did have to flash the Emperor's permission slip, as the Necron mind control that was preventing them from noticing our mystic resonance was wearing off. We did mollify them by saying we were basically rogue traders, but not exactly, but that's a longer explanation than we have time for. This worked for the Fists, who were already having a weird day, and we sent them to the ship with a warning about the sanctioned Xenos they might find on board. We didn't mention the pending presence of Rubic Marines, but that was a problem for tomorrow us. We also took a sample of auramite, the golden metal the walls were made of, to plate our Jank Knight, and whatever else we wanted to look shiny. The Jokero Playhouse was our next stop, although we weren't too happy about it. Anything in the 40k universe that could be called a playhouse was probably a real problem. Turns out we were giving the universe, or the DM, too much credit. We heard the noise of activity even before we entered the room, and when we did, we found rows of workbenches and laboratory setups, manned by Jokero, the cybernetic apes. All of which were sitting in modified barrels. The closest glanced briefly up at us as we entered, curled his lip in greeting, and returned to his work. When we just kept standing there awkwardly, one of them finally knuckled over and gave a soft, "Ook." We understood this to mean, "Can I help you?" Also, we recognized the language, and that gave us some concerns. Competence tried to ook back, but was informed that our host was bilingual, and that her accent was terrible. A brief conversation occurred, and it turned out that some mad tech magos had heard the saying, "more fun than a barrel of monkeys," and decided it was holy writ. So he kidnapped a clan of Jokero and forced them to sit in barrels. Not actually do anything, just be in the barrels. So they had moved their barrels over to workbenches, because you always try to keep a well-armed lunatic happy, and had gone back to their normal thing. They did add padding and cup holders to the barrels, though. This thrilled the Magos, who declared the scripture confirmed and wandered off to be crazy somewhere else. Trazen heard about it, decided it was hilarious, and stole the whole place for himself as a monument to humanity's lunacy. Except that, when he tried to lock them all in time stasis, it kept not working. There was something about the gallery that kept letting time in, for lack of a better word. We wondered about this, but our host pointed to a far corner where 3 or 4 bookshelves stood. We watched as one Jokero moved past them and into a space that didn't look large enough to contain it, and then vanished into a wall. Then it clicked, and we asked if the Jokero were using L-Space, the multidimensional realm that connects all libraries across time and space. He said their cousin had taught them about it. We offered them a berth on our ship, but they weren't hugely interested. Here they came and went as they pleased, and Trazen either didn't know, didn't care, or thought all Jokero looked alike. So they had a pretty cozy setup. But they did say they would link our shipboard library to theirs, because we seemed like nice people. And we offered them Necrodermis to play with, and they would be on call if we needed them. But the Discworld librarian was guarding L-Space, and he thought we were nice, well-intentioned, but incredibly destructive lunatics, and he wasn't letting us anywhere near any of his books. So it wasn't like we could use the portal much. Still, they had some digital weapons lying around, and were more than happy to hand them out. They even took Critical's Power Fist, and, a few minutes later, came back with 4 rings, one for each finger that, when held together, merged to form power knuckle dusters. Our next stop was the Siege of Vrax display. Weeb declared that we would certainly find a use for some Deathcore of Krieg. All we had to do was free them from Trazen's nefarious machines. As we emerged from the hallway into the gallery, however, we realized that might be a problem. We found ourselves at the bottom of a mud and muck swamp trench. Men in ragged uniforms propped themselves against the wall, or tried to clear off the concrete beneath for a seat that didn't ooze into their pants. Most were shaking, and none were paying attention to the constant, nearby shelling hammering our senses. Then, abruptly, the shelling stopped, and a ringing silence assaulted us. The men around us whipped their heads up as one. In the still, we heard a single man cry, "God, Emperor, no!" followed by a bang and the slosh of a body hitting the mud. Although, knowing Trazen, the poor bastard probably wasn't getting out that easy. Several of what we finally saw to be PDF troopers around us looked like they wanted to follow the man's example, but they were stopped by a shrill whistle in the distance. It was joined by several others, while near us an officer type shouted, "Rifles! To the line!" and the men threw themselves into position at the lip of the trench. We joined them to see a cloud of fog, powdered dirt, and cordite drifting across no man's land. Then, through the haze, we saw shapes begin to emerge, faces covered in gas masks and bayonets leveled. They fired as they walked, calmly and steadily, through the hail of lasbolts from our lines. We were on the receiving end of a Deathcore charge. Uh-oh. Welshi asked Critical to think of the worst thing he could. Demonic spiders were the nightmare of the day, and Welshi used mind and forces to create a car-sized holographic spider in the midst of the Krieg assault, intending to distract them. It did, although it popped up behind the first wave so they didn't notice. But the Deathcoremen moving in behind them did, and several peeled off to deal with the horrible, probably Xenos or Chaos threat. When their attacks passed right through it, and its attacks did the same, they figured out it was some sort of projection and started to move on. Critical decided he wasn't having this, and used entropy to make reality his bitch once more. You'd think it would learn at this point. Random chance caused the photons to vibrate just so, and the creature spontaneously became physical. Look, with 5 dots in entropy, it doesn't have to make sense. And it certainly wasn't manifesting a demon in the material plane, no matter what that one Inquisitor said. Welshy's next move was probably actual heresy, though, as he decided that nothing was more distracting than something unpleasantly sexy. So he asked Weeb to think of something appropriate, then used the spell once more to make the creature a nude, female Drider sort of thing. She called him Dad and promised to make him proud as she said to the guardsmen, who were locked in stasis on death for later restoration, so she didn't actually have to hold back. He smiled and cheered her on. Several of the rest of us vomited. Competence had a kinder fate in store for the enemy than sexy spider demon, and tried to summon the Jank Knight once more. Unfortunately, though it had been beamed back aboard ship with our actually reliable transportation tech, we hadn't informed all of the engine seers we had on board that it worked just by pushing a button and no incense was required. Well, most of our techies were Xenos who didn't believe that nonsense, but the few humans insisted, and our alien techies were just having fun swinging the sensors around and spouting gibberish. So when competence called for them to send it back down, all she got was some excuses about appeasing the machine spirit and a request to try back in 30 minutes. With that in mind, and not wanting to kill the people who were technically on our side, she pulled her transmogrifier gun and started generating a cloud of dense fog across no man's land. She wanted a compound that would dissolve rubber and plastic to destroy their masks and equipment. We made some suggestions, but pointed out that almost anything that would eat through rubber and plastic like that would probably do a number on flesh, too. Fortunately, she had magic, so she just made one. A yellowish, semi-transparent cloud emerged from the ground, slowly eating away at the rubber in the Krieg uniforms. Of course, while this damaged their rebreather devices, the atmosphere wasn't actually toxic, so it didn't do much except give them some identity crises, which they intended to deal with through murder. She retreated behind the rest of us and spent her time making the cloud larger and more effective, first attacking specific metals to disable the internal mechanisms of their lasguns, in which effort she was helped at times by Welshie. We couldn't see their faces, but we were pretty sure the looks on them were hilarious when their guns just went click, click. Didn't affect their bayonets, or shovels. At least until we shouted this concern to competence, and she added another level to her spell. By the end of things, several Death Corps were climbing onto the spider demon, mostly naked, trying to beat her to death with their bare hands. While the rest of us dealt with the Kriegers, that guy went hunting for Trazen. It didn't take long to find him, as he was standing on an observation platform behind the Krieg lines, watching the fun. You'd think he would know better by now, but he was 60 million years old and rather set in his ways. That guy tried to drop him in the sun again, but missed and only got the empty vacuum of space. A hole opened in reality behind the Necron, and he was sucked into the vacuum with a cry of, "Son of a bitch!" Again, we saw his essence escape, and we were pretty sure it made a rude gesture in passing. Later on, that guy repeated this trick, only with a Death Corps trooper, since Weeb had insisted that we capture, note, not free, some of them. He called the ship to give them some advance warning, i.e. he got on the box and said, "Hey, catch!" But they had been working with us long enough to be prepared. Then, as one line of Death Corps advanced on our position with non-functional weapons, a portal opened up under one's feet, and he dropped from sight like a cartoon character walking over a manhole. He landed in a tightly secured bay/brig with a comfy armchair, some calming tea, and Imperial chants playing softly in the background. And most of the oxygen replaced with THC smoke, which got past his now inoperable gas mask. We called it the reception room, and had planned on using it for people exposed to our shenanigans. He'd be just fine. By this time, the first line of Death Corps had reached the trench, and though their guns didn't do anything, the stabbing still seemed effective. The Vrax PDF took the brunt of this, although one did have the poor taste to try to stab critical. In response, the mage dislocated his own shoulder and made reality cringe, such that all of the Krieger's bootlaces were suddenly tied together, and the ground shifted slightly, tilting away from our position. As one man, the line of Death Corps tried to shift its footing, got caught in the laces, and fell prone. It would have been hilarious, except the slapstick was marred by the lack of shouting, or even response, from the Kriegers as they struggled to their feet. But at least we had struck a blow to their egos that they would feel for the rest of their lives. You know, if Trazen didn't reset their memories when he reset the chamber. Intent on capitalizing on this, Bard tried to summon a spirit of chillness and gentle relaxation to haunt the gallery. The Kriegers on the ground suddenly just wanted to lie there, maybe take a little nap. Falling down wasn't an embarrassing failure, it was just a happy little accident. Yeah. The mind mages among us could tell that the Death Corps' new outlook was warring with their training and indoctrination, and was losing the fight. After all, you could say the nuking of their world was another happy little accident. So Welshie used matter to add Xanax to the doom fog. It turned the pale blue of an antidepressant commercial. That guy referred to this as hotboxing the Krieg. To be fair, we probably could have hit them with something like this on the soul level, but we pointed out that the Death Corps were renowned for their unbreakable will, so we decided to take a more physical route. We basically decided to leave things at that. We called our spider lady back to us, and determined that as long as the gallery kept running, fresh units of deathcore would march into our fog and collapse. There were a lot of them around the galaxy, and Trazen apparently had backups of backups of backups. We were worried that eventually the impromptu cuddle puddle would rise over the fog, and we'd have more problems. So we informed the PDF that their leaders had fallen to chaos and gotten their world destroyed. Then we offered them a fate that didn't end on a deathcore bayonet. Anywhere but here sounded pretty good, and they agreed to join our crew. We sent them to the clean section of the ship with the Imperial Fists, while the Spider Lady was dubbed Janeway, because, well, she noted she had cosplayed a Spider Lady in one episode, and we had a Star Trek ship, and was sent to take the captaincy, on the premise that her arachnid reflexes would be very useful in such a situation. We voxed the old hands on board to warn them about sectioning off the not cool with this part of the ship/crew. Then we expanded the cloud of gear-destroying happy gas to fill the entire gallery and moved on, leaving the Tesseract intact. We decided to track Trazen next to the War in Heaven gallery, which consisted of 3 factions dueling in a forest glade. There were about 24 nondescript Necron soldiers squared off against a group of large orcs, who were being supported by Eldar with ranged weapons. We double-checked, and the orcs were just orcs, although they were especially large versions in unbelievably ancient armor. Probably Trazen cutting corners again and going with good enough. In fact, later investigation revealed they were all wearing platform shoes. Besides, rumor had it he only had the one Krork. Still, we were always happy to meet with some boys, as we had the blessings of Gork and Mork. In fact, we had ways to deal with all of these soldiers. We watched them battle for a few minutes, as they were entirely unconcerned with us. Finally, Competence was able to override the Necron network security and issue the shutdown commands. Before the opposing army could get over their confusion, Bard stepped forward, channeling Gork and Mork, and kicked the largest greenskin in the crotch to assert dominance. Last, Welshi did his best to speak the Eldar language. He failed, given that Eldar brains are much more advanced than humans, and their language is correspondingly complex. But they appreciated his attempt, and turned to listen. We quickly figured out they weren't actually from the War in Heaven, but were still tens of thousands of years old, and predated the fall of the Eldar. So Welshi's promise of a new universe, as their new god of sanctuary, didn't hold much sway. Until, that is, we had one take a few steps out of the gallery. Once we mystically showed him how, he gave a yelp of, "Oh, gods!" and dashed back to the cover of the tesseracted chamber, where he explained the horror that was eating their souls to his companions. These stealthed Craftworld Eldar guards that were constantly trailing/protecting their new savior, and which we had completely forgotten about before this moment, were called on to confirm. We also asked about their health and sanity, but they hadn't followed us all the way into the warp, so they were mostly fine. While all this was going on, that guy once again established his target. He spotted the gleam of necrodermis in the trees beyond the clearing. Instead of dropping Trazen through a portal, this time that guy transported himself. He appeared directly next to the Necron, arm draped around the robotic shoulders. "Hi." "Bye." And Trazen dropped through another portal into the vacuum of space. Critical and Weeb wandered around for a few minutes collecting interesting flora and fauna. They found a turquoise, multi-legged squirrel thing that was pretty cute, while the rest of us made provisions for our new allies, and made sure the ship's Xenos section was clear. The Battle of Armageddon was next, and on the way Weeb informed us of the confusion surrounding that title. It could be the First War, which was an invasion by Angron and the forces of Khorne, and which officially didn't happen according to the Inquisition. Or it could be the official First War, where an Orc fleet caught everyone off guard. Or the Second War, actually the third one, where Ghazghkull Magthraka came back for some more fun. We walked into the gallery to see that it wasn't orcs and things wouldn't be that easy. Instead, in the midst of the hive rubble, stood a squad of gray-clad space marines with fancy force weapons, facing an encroaching horde of what were clearly bloodletters, minor demons of Khorne. Weeb identified the marines as Grey Knights, and told us to hold our inquisitorial rosettes and permission slip from the Emperor in plain view. Because we radiated warpy shit, and these guys hate that. But they were familiar with Inquisitors and their peculiarities. The ability to order an exterminatus on an entire planet means one is no longer crazy and warp-riddled, but eccentric and an outside-the-box thinker. So we weren't too far outside the norm. Well, maybe that's giving us too much credit, because the first thing that happened was Welshie stepping forward and haranguing the demons about the total impracticability of flaming swords. You can barely see, you warped the metal, there's no quick way to sheathe or unsheathe it, and so on. This went on for a while, and even drew some looks from the combatants. One of them lived to regret this, as Critical locked eyes, cracked his wrist, and invoked his new spell, Convert Minion. The poor cornate turned into a gigantic hand with a schlorp, and there was another taint puncher. Critical assured us that he was working on turning more powerful demons into a biblically accurate angel. Nothing is made better by the phrase, biblically accurate. The demons were still engaged with their Space Marine opponents, except for the one next to the new taint puncher. He freaked the fuck out and began flailing wildly at the thing, which we found to be perfectly reasonable. But none of them were paying attention to Weeb, who moved behind the demons and began a magical dance, careful to hold his rosette in full view as he pumped magic into the rhythm. The music sounded different to everyone, mystically attuned to whatever they found most appealing, as it sapped their wills. The Grey Knights told us later that it sounded like a club remix of Imperial chanting, like doom, 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 ah, doom, doom, doom. One even started tapping his foot lightly. For her part, Competence contacted the ship and, after some shouting, convinced the crew to teleport the Jank Knight back down to her. She made sure to be visible to the Grey Knights as she gestured dramatically, and the Knight appeared about 20 feet up, landing in a battle pose. The crew said it was a calibration issue, but we were pretty sure they just thought it would be cool. We would have been more mad, but they were right. The Space Marines didn't applaud, because that would be beneath their dignity, but she did get several nods of approval. Under Competence's direction, the Jank Knight set about chasing the bloodletters around the battlefield. It caught one and proceeded to engage in a round of demon bowling, which we enjoyed. Most of the bloodletters jumped out of the way, and it wasn't a whole lot of damage, but it wounded their pride. And since demons are based on emotion and thought, that wasn't nothing. This wasn't helped by a pedantically righteous Welshie reaching out to turn their demonic spirit swords into real, material ones, which mostly proceeded to melt in the warpish heat. Two of the demons began to cry. I mean, those swords were birthday presents. Literally, given to them at birth. They were the only things they had ever owned and their best friends. But they were demons, so it was funny. The Grey Knights congratulated him on making the literal embodiments of anger and violence weep. Bard followed up by commenting, "Hey, it's okay. You can still fight without swords. Hand to hand. I mean, seems more like fondling people to me, but whatever. If you want to be Slaneshi about it, that's fine. You do you." The wailing increased. Sensing weakness, Critical moved in. There was a crack, and one of the criers curled in on himself, becoming a strange, fleshy mass. And then fingers and a wrist sprouted out of the ball. The demon next to him stopped crying and started screaming, scrambling to its feet. This was wise, as the hand leapt to the attack like a gigantic facehugger. It missed, but the psychological damage was considerable, and indiscriminate. This turned into an acrobatic display between the two hands and several demons as they flipped and struck at each other, none managing to land a hit despite their clear effort. Honestly, we wished we had recorded it. For their part, the Grey Knights at this end of the scrum were just confused by the crying demons, the orc-looking knight, the hand things, and these lunatics with inquisitorial authority. The ones near the entrance went to attack the bloodletters closest to them, who all seemed lethargic and uninterested. But we told them to hold off because we had a plan. The Grey Knights held a conference on their internal channels, and presumably decided this was the kind of thing that officers were made for. They all took a step away from the weirdness, weapons held at the ready but not currently aimed at anyone. As one later told us, they were operating on the idea that this is clearly warp nonsense, and it's probably heresy, but heresy isn't usually this silly. Wait and see seems like a good plan. The sensibilities of our new, highly armed friends in mind, Competence took a moment to aim her transmogrifier and generated a dense, psychically impenetrable fog around the Jank Knight's legs. One demon had been standing nearby, deciding the night was the least horrible thing in the vicinity, when the cloud emerged. I don't know what bloodletters normally sound like, but I doubt it was as high or uncertain as this one, as it said, "Guys? Guys, what's happening? Is anyone still out there? guys?" We all laughed and decided that this one could be our new mascot. So Competence had the Jank Knight pick it up by the scruff of the neck and hold it up for everyone to see. The demon did its best to look compliant, and we were pretty sure we heard a snort from one of the Astartes. The demons nearest our group were no more fortunate, as they were under Weeb's sway. Just to be safe, Welshie went over to the Grey Knights and started talking loudly and nerdily about superior color schemes. He even pulled out some paint swatches. This was done mostly to keep their notice off Weeb and the rest of us. Bard, for his part, went to the last remaining free demon and put his arm companionably about its shoulders. As it turned in confusion and anger, he hit it full force with a mental image of the multiverse and higher levels of reality. "Yeah, you, your universe, and your god are all just dark satire by some British nerds. You exist to make people laugh and to sell expensive plastic toys. Hey, don't cry. Nope, put the sword down. Slitting your own throat won't do anything. You're not going to get off that easy. Do you want to come with me and make the hurting stop? Yeah? Good. Come on. And leading the demon into the fog where the Space Marines couldn't see, he called upon the power of the trickster to convert this demon into one of his, taking the form of a small, big-headed, pinkish-yellow bird. There they joined the various hands that Critical had created out of the other bloodletters. The first hands had caught their targets long enough for Critical to get off his Convert Minions spell. Around Weeb, two of the bloodletters saw what was happening to them, saw the hands, and decided that whatever Weeb was doing was the preferable option. They surrendered to the groove, and their skin turned silvery and their forms more fluid, like people made out of mercury, as they tangoed into the cloud. The others followed a few seconds later, forming a small conga line. Competence had one more thing to do, as she thought the bloodletter mascot probably wouldn't do too well if we brought it to the ship as is. So, channeling her magic through the Jank Knight, she converted the demon. It was pretty easy, as the fight had gone completely out of it, which, considering it was a demon of fighting, is saying something. I can't really describe what it looked like, other than generally humanoid and not very horrifying, but Competence had decided to teach Chaos what the word really meant. So all of her demons were totally individual, and no two were alike. At least that was the plan. Anyway, this was accomplished inside the fog where the Grey Knights couldn't see. Then Competence announced that we would sacrifice the night to destroy all the demons. Bard dashed back to the group, and we had the ship beam up the Jank Knight and everything touching it to one of our specially designated heresy bays. Not the name we put on the doors. While several of the party made an impressive but entirely pointless explosion. From there, we would ship them to whatever pocket dimensions we had handy. This just left Trazen to deal with. That guy was having some trouble locating the robotic bastard, as he had apparently learned his lesson, so instead we all began making loud threats to start screwing up his galleries, starting by convincing these Grey Knights to become hot pink knights, with glitter and rhinestones. Basically, we threatened the nerd with taking all of his toys out of the original packaging and doodling in the pages of all his collector's edition comics. In the distance we heard, "You wouldn't." No, you would. Jackasses. Trazen stepped out from behind some rubble, keeping his distance, and shouted, "Go away, you idiots." "Trazen, you bastard! If you'd just given us the control rod, you wouldn't be losing your toys." There was a muffled conversation, and this was corrected to, "You wouldn't be losing as many of your toys." "Didn't I tell you the rod was with Orican? We know you're lying." "Fuck. Fine. You know what? You've ruined so many of my things. I can't even get the gas out of that one room. Do you know what a happy death corpsman looks like? It's freaky. If I give you the rod, will you just go?" "The rod, these knights, and the Kriegers." "No, I'm not giving you any of my Kriegers." There was almost an argument, but Competence pointed out that we had one, so we could just clone more. This led to a lot of looks from everyone that wasn't us, but finally we came to an agreement. Trazen had a drone bring in a broken Necron rod, and we threatened that if it wasn't the real deal, we'd be back. He assured us that he believed us, and it was genuine. And with that, we made our way back to the ship. Now full of ancient Eldar, confused orcs, resold Necrons, gene stealers, a Drider captain, PDF troops, some random opera patrons, Imperial fists, and a whole mess of demons of various new flavors. Our army of deadly bullshit was well on its way, and we had a control rod to forcefully enlist more Necrons to our side. So long as everyone respected the white line of tape running down the length of the ship corridors to keep the Imperials separate from the Xenos and demons, and stayed out of Weeb's pocket dimension / broom closet of doom, everything would be just fine. End of chapter 9. Thank you everyone for joining. I know this was a long one, long time getting it together. We had a lot of fun playing the separate rooms and screwing around with everything. 5 dots in Mage the Ascension is just broken, especially when we're playing as fast and loose with the rules as we already do. So yeah, a lot of nonsense shenanigans and a lot of fun with it. So it's a blast as the DM to go like, oh, I've made this whole thing. Oh, you're just going to nope out of the entire fight. Well done. And laugh about it. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this one. Not many left. I think 2 or 3. So I hope you stick with us for the ending. Thanks everybody. Take care. Bye.